When it came to romance, independent Barbara Bentley thought her ship had sailed until she met Rear Admiral John Perry.
He won the Congressional Medal of Honor, and he spoke 7 languages. It was like being in the movies.
But Barbara would quickly discover troubled seas ahead.
He was full of baloney.
And she would find herself drowning in doubt and fighting for her life.
She walked in and immediately smelled a very strong, strange odor.
And he's staring down at me with wild, wild eyes. Devil eyes.
When it comes to love and marriage, things aren't always what they seem. As a single divorcee living in the suburbs of San Francisco, Barbara Bentley was tough to impress.
I was 35 years old. I was a strong, independent woman. I had a career. I owned my own home. I had a lot of friends, so life was good.
I don't think she was at that point very excited about finding a man. I think she was just happy to be Barbara.
But one night in the summer of 1981, Barbara did meet a man, and a most intriguing man at that.
My girlfriend called me to come and be a fourth for dinner, and that night I met John Perry. He came walking in, very erect posture and his gleaming eyes and ruddy complexion, nicely dressed. It was like, oh, well, he looks nice.
54-year-old John Perry was older than Barbara by 19 years and worked as an international military consultant. But there was far more to his story than that.
He said he was a retired Rear Admiral in the Navy. His father was Admiral Perry that started the Sea Breeze in World War II. And he had stories of how he won the Congressional Medal of Honor in Vietnam. It was a very interesting evening. I had never met somebody so full of history.
I think Barbara was in awe of John when she first met him.
Even by Barbara's high standards, John seemed like quite a catch. The feeling was mutual.
From the minute that we met, John was very attentive to me. He was very focused on making me feel special.
Before long, the two became an item, and John let Barbara in on his past.
John told me that he had 4 children and 2 ex-wives. He said the children were estranged because his military service and he had been gone for too long while they were being raised. And I felt sorry for John because it seemed like he was very hurt about it.
The Admiral also confided in Barbara he would soon be a very wealthy man.
He said he was the black sheep of the family, but he was going to inherit a large amount of money from his grandmother when she passed away. And at that moment, I looked at him and I said, well, money doesn't interest me. Honesty does.
Barbara hoped to meet John's family one day. In the meantime, their relationship took off. Just over a year after they met, Barbara proudly became Mrs. Admiral John Perry in a small ceremony in Tijuana, Mexico.
We went to this very nice restaurant that John knew about, and when the band came on, they started playing Here Comes the Bride. The whole restaurant kind of joined in, and it was very joyous.
Barbara was thrilled to be an admiral's wife. But just a few months into their marriage, her credit card bills began to pile up.
John liked nice restaurants. He liked nice cars, going on vacations to nice places. And we often wondered, how they could afford to do this.
He would have consulting jobs. Sometimes he would make money on it, and sometimes he wouldn't. John was spending a lot of money, and I kept trying to change him, trying to show him how we could budget better. I would look at it as, well, this is something we just have to work on.
While Barbara tried to keep their spending in check, they still enjoyed a VIP lifestyle. But almost 10 years into their marriage, everything would change. By February of 1991, the couple had weathered their share of ups and downs. but nothing could have prepared Barbara for what would come next.
John was offered a job with the government in Egypt, and we were in Washington, D.C. to get our documentation so John could carry on with his commission.
After breakfast on their second day, Barbara went back to their hotel room to meet John.
When I walked up to the room, the door was ajar, and I pushed it open and stepped inside. And I looked over to the bathroom, and I noticed a brown bottle sitting on the counter and some latex surgical gloves.
In an instant, Barbara's life would take a horrifying turn.
At that point, he grabbed me, and I started a battle for my life.
In the winter of 1986, 5 years before her marriage would go horribly wrong, Barbara Bentley was content to be the wife of Admiral John Perry.
I felt that John really loved me, that he would bring me presents, he would cook, he would clean. You know, it was like we had this good partnership going.
But still, she was troubled by the fact that in 4 years of marriage, she had never met John's family or his children.
Barbara wanted so much to meet John's family, and John kept giving Barbara excuses like, oh, well, this person called today, but you weren't here, so I couldn't let you talk to them.
I even wrote letters to all these family members, and within a couple weeks, we got all of them back with no such person at this address.
John said, well, they're just not accepting those. They see who it's from, and they think you're a gold digger. They think you married me because you want everything that I have. And Barbara believed this.
Then, one day in the summer of 1987, John told Barbara he had heard from his son when his war medals arrived in the mail.
John started telling me about each one, what it was and what he won it for, and that his son had finally decided to go ahead and send him the medals. I told him, well, we should get those framed so we can put them up on the wall, and we did.
2 years later, in January of 1989, John proudly wore his Medal of Honor when he took Barbara to President George Bush's inaugural ball.
People would just step aside and let us walk through. The first person to stop and salute us was the President of the United States. It was very exciting. It's the whole day was very exciting.
But less than a year later, the thrill was gone, along with John's medals. It all started when 2 FBI agents showed up at their front door.
They wanted to know if John was home, and I said, well, no, he isn't. And they said, well, we have something here. Would you give it to him? And I said, no, you'll have to come back and give it to him later. I'd been told by John not to ever accept anything. And I just was very shocked that the FBI would be at my door.
Soon after they left, Barbara noticed something strange in the living room.
I was sitting in there waiting for John to come home, and I noticed that the medals were missing off the wall.
When John returned, Barbara asked him what was going on.
He said, well, the frame was falling apart, and I took it to the frame shop. And I said, well, isn't it strange you took your medals with it? And I was more worried about the medals than it seemed he was.
Then, when Barbara told John about the FBI stopping by, he claimed he had to testify at a federal case for work.
John said they called me at the last minute, and so the FBI must have been coming to get some more information.
A few months later, Barbara began to have concerns of a different kind.
John was no longer going to work, wasn't calling any of his business associates, and then all of a sudden he was playing sweepstakes and buying things through the mail. You know, I would get so frustrated because, John, we can't afford this.
By the beginning of 1990, with their debt still mounting, Barbara was running out of patience. Luckily, John said he was finally getting some money from his trust fund. But first, they needed to visit a bank in Florida.
So we were going to meet with the banker to pick up a check. I was driving, and on the way to the bank, John clutched his chest and yelled out and keeled over. He said, "My heart, my heart."
Panicked, Barbara rushed her husband to a nearby hospital. Once John was admitted, she called the bank to cancel their appointment and learned something odd.
The banker had never heard of John, and there was no appointment.
Barbara went back to their hotel to search for any paperwork.
I was checking out John's briefcase, and I just didn't know what to think. I was so confused.
There was nothing about their appointment, but what she did find inside that briefcase sent a chill down her spine.
I was in a state of confusion. I felt very frightened.
In June of 1990, Barbara Bentley was shocked when she uncovered the unthinkable in her husband's briefcase.
I was questioning myself. I was questioning the craziness. I was very unsettled.
Why would a retired naval officer need a weapon? When she returned to the hospital later that afternoon, Barbara learned that indeed John had suffered a heart attack, but was recovering well.
So when I got to the hospital room, I challenged him on this gun. I said, "Well, what did you need a gun for?" He said, "Well, we were picking up this money." And I said, "But it would be a check, probably cashier's check."
Then Barbara mentioned that the bank had no appointment for them.
Of course, he had an excuse of why the guy maybe didn't remember him or whatever. Then I realized, well, here's this man laying in this hospital bed, just having suffered a heart attack. I better back off. So I did.
A week later, the couple returned home to California without ever visiting the bank. And Barbara couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was very wrong. But before Barbara could question him about the family money, John had some good news about a consulting gig in Egypt.
It was going to pay enough money to cover all of our bills. Then he said that the real good news was I could go with them for the first 2 weeks, that the government would pay my way to do that. And I was excited because I'd always wanted to see Egypt.
I didn't give it much credence at all because it was like, here's another John story. I think at this point, both George and I probably had kind of had enough of John.
Sure enough, there was a slight snag in the plan.
It was getting closer to time for departure, and we still didn't have our special diplomatic passports that we were supposed to get from the leader of this team. So John said that there was some kind of politics going on, and we better fly to see the Admiral in Washington, D.C.
Once in D.C., the Admiral was hard to track down.
We go off to Annapolis, and there's no Admiral, and he said, the Admiral is over at such and such base in Maryland. So we rushed over there, and there's no Admiral there. And this went on and on.
Pushed to her limit, Barbara threatened to leave John in D.C.
I told John that if we didn't see the Admiral, then I was going to go home. I had had it.
The following morning, Barbara stayed behind to pay for breakfast, then went up to the hotel room to meet John.
I looked over to the bathroom, and I noticed a brown bottle sitting on the counter and some latex surgical gloves. And I said, "John, what are you doing with these?"
John told Barbara that his doctor prescribed him ether.
At that point, he grabbed me, put an ether-soaked wash rag over my face, and I started a battle for my life.
As Barbara struggled to free herself, John tried to smother the life out of her.
And I'm not screaming because I know I can't breathe this ether. And I broke away enough to get to the door and open it up.
But John wasn't about to let Barbara escape.
He grabbed me back and pulled me back in, and he pushed me to the floor and started pouring the ether on my face.
Barbara knew she had to get out of there immediately if she was going to get out alive.
He ran out of the ether, and he's staring down at me with wild, wild eyes, devil eyes. I looked up at him. I said, "John, if there's a problem, we can talk about this." And it snapped him out of the trance.
Eerily calm, John made a shocking revelation.
He said, "I just found out I have terminal cancer. I wanted to put you under so I could go jump off the Key Bridge and commit suicide." I sat down next to him, and I took his arm and I just started rubbing it.
Within minutes, John seemed to be asleep, and Barbara knew it was now or never.
She was going to soon uncover the lies and the deceptions, and he was going to get rid of her.
I decided that I needed to leave the room or I wouldn't leave it alive.
On the morning of February 15, 1991, Barbara Bentley knew her life was in danger at the hands of her husband.
I got to the door, opened it up very quietly, and closed it very quietly. And I went as fast as I could through the main desk and told them to call the police. My husband had just tried to murder me with ether.
Officers arrived within minutes and arrested John Perry as he tried to escape.
I was just really just dazed and just kind of not in reality of what was happening.
Arlington County, Virginia prosecutor Theo Stamos was assigned to the case.
Barbara was traumatized. Her sense was that, okay, there's a huge disconnect here with, who I thought he was and what just happened to me in that hotel room, and why did that happen?
A few days after the attack, Barbara returned home to California, alone. She was determined to uncover the truth about her husband of almost 10 years. She called an admiral who John had worked with in the past.
And that's when he told me, "Well, don't you know about the FBI investigation?" John had been investigated for impersonating an officer.
The FBI had confiscated John's medals, and Barbara was stunned to find out why. Her husband, the celebrated Admiral, wasn't an admiral at all. In fact, he had been discharged from the Navy some 40 years earlier, and no one knew where he acquired his many war medals.
When the FBI agent confirmed that John was not a retired rear admiral, it was like, oh my gosh, he's not who he said he was.
And that was just the beginning.
John had a criminal record for the past 40 years, that he had been arrested for grand theft and for impersonating officers and check fraud and just a whole laundry list of activities.
Even John's wealthy grandmother and 4 children were fictional. But he was honest about one thing.
He was indeed the son of Admiral Perry of the Seabees in World War II, and he was the black sheep of the family.
We eventually learned that John had mounting financial pressures, and he had a life that he had constructed that was really about to fall apart because sort of the jig was up.
It was like unreal that this could be a person who said he loved me, and so I felt betrayed.
In June 1991, John Perry went to trial and pleaded not guilty to attempted first-degree murder.
The opening statement by defense counsel basically was that he was trying to save his wife the grief of watching him die a slow death. The detective and I met with his doctor. He said, no, the guy didn't have cancer.
After only 2 days, the jury found John Perry guilty. He was sentenced to 5 years behind bars.
One of the things the homicide detective found out for me was the location of John's stepmother. And I got in contact with her, and I met with her. She said he had joined the service, and he had come out of boot camp and was with a friend in a hotel, dove into a pool, hit his head, and he was in the hospital for 3 or 4 months. And after that, he had a medical discharge. She said he was never the same. He started getting into trouble after that.
Barbara's ordeal with John wasn't over just yet. After serving only 14 months, he was released on probation.
My attorney told me I was going to have to pay John alimony. I would have to give him half my retirement fund, and I had to pay car and medical insurance on him. And that was when I decided that the law needed to be changed, that was not right, that somebody could try to murder you and then still profit by it.
On January 1st, 1996, Barbara succeeded in changing the law, and her payments to John ended.
I applauded her. She went through a difficult situation, very difficult, and she learned a lot, I think, about herself. And I think mostly she learned how tough she is.
Barbara still lives in California, and today she is happily remarried.
You know, I've been married now 13 years to Rex. He's been very supportive of everything that I've wanted to do. I didn't have trouble trusting again. It was truly trusting myself more than trusting another person, trusting my judgment. I wondered, why did this happen to me?
Barbara has since written a book about her experience.
I decided that I would write a book to help others understand there is light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes it takes a lot of hard work to get there, but it's worth it.